Something is happening around you, and deep down you already feel it. The exhaustion, the confusion, the constant pressure that makes no sense. What if it is not normal? What if someone opened a spiritual door against you and you never realized it? Tonight, hidden warfare will be exposed. The signs, the attacks, the patterns people ignore until their lives begin collapsing piece by piece. And before this message ends, you will know exactly what the enemy never wanted you to discover. One of the first signs that witchcraft has been done against you is sudden unexplainable heaviness, not normal stress, not ordinary tiredness, a spiritual weight. You wake up exhausted even after sleeping. Your mind feels clouded. Your motivation disappears. You begin things but cannot finish them. And the frightening part is this: everything may look normal on the outside while something is draining you internally. This is how spiritual oppression often begins, quietly, slowly, like a shadow, entering through an unlocked door. Many people ignore this stage because they think they are simply going through a hard season. But warfare hides itself inside normal-looking problems. That is why so many victims never recognize the attack until damage has already been done. You must understand this carefully. Witchcraft attacks are designed to weaken your spiritual resistance before they attack other areas of your life. First your strength, then your focus, then your peace, relationships, then your destiny. The enemy knows that a spiritually alert person is dangerous, so the assignment begins with exhaustion, distraction, mental confusion, constant pressure, and strange emotional instability. You suddenly become irritated over small things. You feel angry without reason. You feel empty during prayer. You try to focus on God, but your mind feels scattered every single time. And this is where many people become afraid, because they know something feels wrong, but nobody around them understands. You try explaining it to people, but they dismiss it. You're overthinking, you're just stressed out, you need rest. But deep inside, you know this is different. You know something changed. Many former occult members have testified that one of the main objectives of witchcraft is to spiritually suffocate a person slowly. Not overnight, gradually, like poison dripping into water. The victim loses clarity little by little, hope little by little, strength little by little, until they begin accepting defeat as normal. And this is exactly what the enemy wants. Because once a person accepts spiritual oppression as normal life, they stop fighting back. Have you noticed strange patterns recently? Repeated nightmares, dark dreams, seeing the same disturbing symbols over and over, dreams of being chased, dreams involving dead relatives, dreams where someone feeds you food, dreams where you are trapped, tied down, drowning, or unable to scream. Pay attention, because spiritual attacks often manifest through repeated dream activity, especially when the dreams leave behind fear, heaviness, panic, or confusion after waking up. Some people wake up at exactly the same hour every night. Others feel sudden terror in the darkness. Others hear whispers. Others experience overwhelming fear during prayer. This is not entertainment. This is not coincidence. Spiritual warfare is real. And one of the greatest mistakes you can make is ignoring repeated spiritual patterns. The enemy survives through secrecy. What stays hidden stays powerful, but exposure weakens darkness. That is why you must become spiritually observant. Watch the patterns. Watch what suddenly changed after certain people entered your life. Watch what happened after envy, conflict, jealousy, or strange encounters. Because many attacks are connected to open spiritual doors, sometimes through toxic relationships, sometimes through occult objects, sometimes through curses spoken over you repeatedly, sometimes through jealousy so intense that it becomes spiritually destructive. You would be shocked how many people smile publicly while secretly desiring your destruction privately. Not everybody celebrating you loves you, not everybody close to you is safe. And spiritual attacks often begin around environments filled with manipulation, envy, control, and hidden hatred. This is why discernment matters. Some of you started struggling after connecting with certain individuals. Before them, your peace was stable, your mind was clear, your prayer life was alive. Then suddenly, confusion entered, chaos entered, fear entered, constant setbacks entered. You started losing opportunities unexpectedly. Financial pressure intensified. Relationships became toxic. Your confidence collapsed. And the attacks kept multiplying one after another. Listen carefully. The enemy studies patterns. If he cannot destroy you instantly, he will attempt to weigh you down gradually. Delay after delay, pressure after pressure, attack after attack, until you emotionally surrender. But this is where many people fail to understand something powerful. Witchcraft cannot overpower spiritual authority rooted in God. Darkness survives through fear, agreement, ignorance, and spiritual passivity. The moment you awaken spiritually, resistance begins. That is why the enemy fights so hard to keep people distracted, addicted, spiritually asleep, emotionally unstable, and disconnected from prayer. Because a spiritually awakened person becomes dangerous to darkness. You begin recognizing attacks faster. You stop entertaining toxic spiritual environments. You stop allowing fear to dominate your thoughts. You stop opening doors through compromise. And suddenly the enemy loses access he once had. But there is another terrifying sign many people overlook: constant unexplained setbacks. You move forward, then something blocks you, again and again and again. Doors close unexpectedly, plans collapse suddenly, favor disappears without explanation. You feel trapped in cycles that refuse to break. This can become emotionally devastating, especially when nobody understands the warfare behind it. Some people battle years of strange resistance without realizing they are under spiritual attack. Every time breakthrough approaches, something happens: conflict, confusion, delay, fear, distraction, loss. It feels like invisible opposition keeps interrupting progress, and eventually, frustration turns into hopelessness. This is exactly how the enemy wants you to feel. Hopeless people stop fighting, discouraged people stop praying, confused people stop discerning, and spiritually exhausted people become vulnerable. That is why you must never normalize repeated spiritual oppression. Do not ignore what keeps repeating. Do not dismiss what keeps warning you. And do not silence your discernment just because others cannot understand what you are sensing. Some of the strongest spiritual attacks happen in silence. No visible evidence, no physical explanation. Just constant pressure against your mind, emotions, peace, and purpose. But hear this clearly: darkness is not greater than the authority of God. No curse is stronger than divine protection. No spiritual assignment can stand forever against a praying, spiritually alert believer. The moment you begin resisting spiritually, things start shifting. Fear loses power. Confusion weakens. Discernment increases. Attacks that once controlled you begin getting exposed. Because exposure is the beginning of freedom. And many of you watching right now are finally beginning to understand what has truly been happening around you all this time. Another major sign that witchcraft may be operating against your life is sudden division and destruction in relationships. This is one of the enemy's oldest strategies: isolation, because when people become spiritually isolated, they become easier to weaken emotionally. Have you noticed how some relationships suddenly change without explanation? People you loved became cold overnight. Misunderstandings exploded from nowhere. Arguments intensified over small things. Trust collapsed. Communication broke down. And no matter how hard you tried to fix things, the tension only grew worse. Pay attention to that, because spiritual attacks often target relationships before anything else. The enemy understands something dangerous. A person surrounded by healthy support, peace, wisdom, and prayer is much harder to destroy. So division becomes the assignment, confusion becomes the weapon, and emotional chaos becomes the battlefield. Some people suddenly begin hating you for no reason. Others begin spreading lies about you. Others become strangely aggressive whenever you speak about your goals, faith, or future. And the frightening part is this: sometimes the people being influenced do not even realize what is happening themselves. They think their emotions are natural. They think the anger is justified. But behind the scenes, spiritual forces are amplifying conflict. This is why discernment is critical. Not every battle is physical. Some battles are spiritual before they become visible. You must stop viewing everything only through human eyes. There are people who entered relationships full of love and peace, then suddenly everything turned dark. Manipulation increased, control increased, mental pressure increased. The atmosphere changed. You walked into the room feeling drained. You left conversations feeling heavy. You started doubting yourself constantly. You lost confidence. You lost clarity. You lost emotional stability. And over time, you stopped recognizing yourself. This happens more than people realize. Because spiritual oppression often hides inside emotionally toxic environments, especially environments controlled by fear, manipulation, intimidation, jealousy, or domination. Some people are not just emotionally harmful, they carry spiritual darkness around them. And if you remain spiritually blind, you will keep allowing access to people assigned to weaken you. That is why you must pay attention to what happens to your spirit around certain individuals. Do you feel peace or confusion? Do you feel strengthened or drained? Do you feel clarity or heaviness? Your spirit notices danger before your mind fully understands it. Many victims of spiritual warfare ignored warning signs because they did not want to appear judgmental. They kept tolerating destructive environments. They kept ignoring discernment. And slowly the attacks intensify. Listen carefully. Not everybody belongs in your inner circle, and not every connection is from God. Some people enter your life carrying hidden agendas, hidden envy, hidden bitterness, hidden resentment, and sometimes even deliberate spiritual intentions against you. This is why you must stop ignoring strange behavior patterns, especially when someone becomes obsessed with monitoring your life, obsessed with your progress, obsessed with your relationships, obsessed with your failures. There are people who secretly celebrate your suffering while pretending to support you publicly. And one of the clearest signs of spiritual danger is when your downfall brings satisfaction to someone around you. Be careful who constantly speaks negativity over your future. Be careful who mocks your faith. Be careful who constantly discourages you. Growth. Words carry spiritual weight. Repeated negativity can create destructive atmospheres around your mind and emotions. This is why spiritually mature people guard what enters their environment, because environments influence spiritual condition, and toxic atmospheres create open doors for oppression. Some of you have been living inside spiritual warfare without realizing it. Every day surrounded by chaos, every day surrounded by manipulation, every day surrounded by fear and emotional exhaustion, until dysfunction started feeling normal. But hear this clearly. God did not create you to live imprisoned by confusion and torment. You were not designed to live under constant emotional attack. You were not created to walk in fear every single day. And one of the first steps toward freedom is recognizing what has been destroying your peace. Some attacks are subtle, very subtle. A strange phone call before an important opportunity. An argument before breakthrough, sudden emotional. Heaviness before prayer. Distractions every time you try to focus spiritually. It feels calculated, because often it is the enemy loves interruption, especially when you are close to growth, close to healing, close to purpose, close to breakthrough. That is when resistance intensifies. That is when confusion increases. That is when strange pressure appears, because darkness becomes threatened when your spiritual eyes begin opening. Have you ever noticed that certain attacks seem to happen whenever you start praying consistently, whenever you start rebuilding your life, whenever you move closer to God? That is not accidental. Spiritual resistance often increases when transformation begins, because the enemy fears spiritually awakened people, people who recognize patterns, people who reject fear, people who stop surrendering mentally. And this is where many people must make a decision. Will you continue ignoring discernment? Or will you finally confront what has been operating against your peace? Some people remain trapped because they keep entertaining what is destroying them. They keep reopening doors they prayed to close. They keep reconnecting with toxic environments. They keep ignoring spiritual warnings. And the cycle repeats endlessly. But freedom requires separation from destructive influences. Sometimes healing begins when access is removed. Sometimes clarity returns when toxic voices disappear. Sometimes peace returns when spiritual doors are finally closed. This is why prayer alone is not enough without discernment and obedience. You cannot keep feeding darkness while asking for deliverance from darkness. There must come a moment where you become spiritually serious. Serious about protecting your mind. Serious about protecting your peace. Serious about protecting your spiritual life. Because warfare is real whether people acknowledge it or not. And many people are losing battles simply because they refuse to recognize them. But today something is changing. Your eyes are opening. The patterns are becoming clearer. The confusion is breaking. And what once operated secretly against you is beginning to lose power through exposure. Because darkness weakens the moment truth enters the room. And some of you are finally realizing you were never crazy. You are under attack. One of the most terrifying signs that witchcraft may be operating against your life is when destruction begins touching every area at the same time. Not one problem, two, everything. Your peace collapses, your finances collapse, your mental strength collapses, your relationships collapse, your focus collapses, and it feels like life suddenly entered a storm that refuses to end. This is where many people reach emotional breaking points, because constant warfare creates exhaustion. You fight one battle, then another appears. You solve one problem, then three more arrive. And eventually you begin asking dangerous questions. Why is this happening to me? Why? Won't anything improve? Why does it feel like something is following me? That feeling, that constant sense of invisible opposition, has pushed many people into fear. But hear this carefully. Fear is one of the greatest weapons used in spiritual warfare. Because once fear controls your thoughts, it starts controlling your decisions. You stop trusting, you stop hoping, you stop building, you stop believing things can change. And slowly, fear becomes a prison. This is why witchcraft attacks often aim directly at the mind. Confusion, torment, overthinking, panic, oppression, mental exhaustion. Because if the enemy can dominate your mind, he can weaken your resistance. Some people suddenly begin experiencing overwhelming anxiety with no clear explanation. Others experience constant paranoia. Others feel watched all the time. Others become trapped in dark thoughts they never struggled with before. And the attacks become stronger during isolation, late nights, moments of weakness, moments of emotional vulnerability. This is why spiritually oppressed people often feel worse in darkness and silence, because that is where fear speaks loudest. But you must understand something powerful. Not every thought entering your mind belongs to you. Some thoughts are assignments, designed to weaken you emotionally, designed to fill you with hopelessness, designed to make you surrender internally before any physical breakthrough appears. That is why spiritually mature people learn to guard their minds aggressively, because mental warfare is real warfare, and many battles are won or lost internally before anything changes externally. Have you ever noticed sudden urges to quit everything, to disappear, to isolate yourself, to abandon your purpose, to stop praying, to stop fighting? That is not random. The enemy wants silence from you, he wants surrender from you, he wants exhaustion from you, because exhausted people stop resisting. And when resistance disappears, oppression grows stronger. Some of you watching this have survived battles nobody around you even knows about, smiling publicly while suffering privately, trying to function while mentally overwhelmed, trying to stay strong while spiritually exhausted. And the hardest part is this: people around you may never fully understand the warfare you have been facing. They only see behavior, they do not see the pressure behind it. They do not see the spiritual heaviness surrounding your life. They do not see the nights where fear tried to consume you completely. This is why many victims of spiritual warfare feel deeply alone, because invisible battles are difficult to explain, especially to spiritually blind people. But isolation is dangerous, because isolation magnifies darkness. The enemy loves silent suffering. He loves hidden torment. He loves convincing people to battle alone. That is why spiritually attacked people must stay connected to prayer, truth, wisdom, and spiritually healthy environments. Because darkness grows strongest where truth is absent. And some of you have spent too much time surrounded by negativity, too much time surrounded by fear, too much time feeding your spirit toxic influences, until your discernment weakened, until your peace disappeared, until your spiritual strength became unstable. Be careful what enters your spirit repeatedly: music, voices, conversations, content, atmospheres. Everything feeding your spirit affects your spiritual condition. People underestimate this constantly, but environments carry influence, and repeated exposure changes people slowly. This is why certain places instantly make you feel uncomfortable spiritually. Your spirit recognizes atmospheres your eyes cannot fully explain. Some environments are spiritually heavy, some carry confusion, some carry oppression, some carry darkness. And spiritually sensitive people notice the shift immediately. That is why discernment matters more than appearances, because darkness rarely introduces itself honestly. It disguises itself, it hides behind charm, behind beauty, behind charisma, behind false peace. And many people open dangerous spiritual doors simply because something looked harmless. But everything spiritual leaves fruit eventually, and destructive fruit reveals destructive roots. This is why you must pay attention to repeated patterns around your life: repeated destruction, repeated confusion, repeated oppression, repeated heaviness, especially when everything intensifies after certain spiritual encounters, relationships, objects, or environments. Some people unknowingly brought darkness into their homes, objects connected to occult practices, spiritual rituals disguised as harmless traditions, items carrying spiritual attachments. And after those things entered, peace disappeared, arguments increased, fear increased, nightmares increased, spiritual heaviness increased. You must stop dismissing spiritual influence as superstition, because Darkness depends on ignorance. The less people discern spiritually, the easier they become to oppress. But something powerful happens when awareness awakens. You stop accepting torment as normal. You stop normalizing chaos. You stop surrendering mentally. And you begin fighting spiritually with authority instead of fear. This is critical because authority changes everything. Fear reacts. Authority confronts. Fear runs. Authority stands firm. Fear submits to darkness. And many of you have spent too long responding to warfare emotionally instead of spiritually, crying without confronting, panicking without praying, fearing without resisting. But spiritual authority requires confidence in God's power, not fear of darkness. Witchcraft survives through intimidation. It wants you afraid. It wants you mentally defeated before the battle even begins. But once you understand your spiritual authority, everything shifts. You stop speaking defeat constantly. You stop agreeing with hopelessness. You stop magnifying fear. And you begin standing against darkness instead of surrendering to it. This is where strongholds begin breaking. Not when fear increases, but when authority awakens. And some of you are reaching that moment right now. The moment where confusion finally breaks. The moment where spiritual blindness finally lifts. The moment where you stop ignoring what has been attacking your life. Because exposure changes everything. And once darkness is exposed, it no longer controls you the same way it once did. The final sign that witchcraft may be operating against your life is when you feel constant resistance whenever you try to move toward purpose, healing, or God. This is where the battle becomes undeniable, because the attacks become targeted, strategic, intentional. You decide to pray seriously and suddenly distractions multiply. You decide to rebuild your life and chaos suddenly erupts. You decide to walk away from toxic environments and emotional pressure intensifies. You begin seeking God more deeply and strange warfare starts surrounding your mind. Why? Because darkness becomes threatened when you start waking up spiritually. The enemy does not panic when people remain distracted. He does not panic when people remain spiritually asleep. He panics when people become disciplined spiritually, when prayer becomes consistent, when discernment becomes sharp, when fear loses control. That is when warfare escalates. Many people misunderstand this stage. They think increased resistance means failure. But sometimes increased resistance is proof that you are finally moving in the right direction. The enemy attacks what threatens him. And spiritually awakened people become dangerous because they stop cooperating with darkness unknowingly. They stop opening doors through compromise. They stop entertaining destructive influences. They stop surrendering mentally. And suddenly the same attacks that once controlled them begin losing power. But this stage is intense because warfare often increases before breakthrough appears. This is where many people quit, right before freedom, right before healing, right before restoration. The pressure becomes overwhelming. The attacks become relentless. And emotionally, people feel like giving up. Some of you know exactly what this feels like. You try to pray, but your mind becomes flooded with distractions. You try to worship, but heaviness enters the room. You try to sleep, but fear suddenly rises. You try to focus, but confusion attacks your thoughts repeatedly. And eventually, frustration begins growing inside you. But hear this clearly. The enemy attacks consistency because consistency creates spiritual strength. A weak prayer life creates vulnerability. A distracted mind creates vulnerability. Spiritual passivity creates vulnerability. This is why darkness constantly fights discipline. Because disciplined believers become spiritually difficult to oppress. You must stop underestimating the power of spiritual consistency. Daily prayer matters. Daily discernment matters. Protecting your environment matters. Guarding your thoughts matters. What you repeatedly tolerate spiritually eventually affects you spiritually. Some people keep allowing destructive atmospheres around them while wondering why peace keeps disappearing. Some keep entertaining darkness through what they watch, listen to, celebrate, and tolerate. Then they become shocked when confusion intensifies. You cannot continuously feed your spirit poison and expect spiritual clarity. Everything entering your spirit leaves influence behind. Everything, that conversation, that environment, that relationship, that hidden compromise, that constant negativity. Over time, it accumulates, and spiritual sensitivity weakens. This is why spiritually mature people become careful about access. Who has access to their mind? Who has access to their emotions? Who has access to their peace? Because not everybody carries light. Some people carry spiritual heaviness everywhere they go. And if you ignore discernment long enough, You will eventually feel the consequences emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. But there is another dangerous sign many people overlook: sudden hatred toward prayer, worship, or spiritual things. You once desired closeness with God, then suddenly everything spiritual feels exhausting. You avoid prayer, you avoid truth, you avoid conviction. You feel disconnected internally. This can happen during intense spiritual warfare because the enemy wants separation from God more than anything else. Why? Because spiritual connection creates protection, strength, authority, and darkness fears spiritually connected people. That is why attacks often intensify around your spiritual life first. The enemy knows that if your connection weakens, your resistance weakens too. But some of you have survived attacks specifically designed to destroy your faith completely. And yet, you are still here, still listening, still fighting, still searching for truth. That alone should tell you something powerful. The enemy failed to destroy you. Yes, the attacks were real. Yes, the warfare was intense. Yes, the pressure nearly broke you. But you survived. And survival itself becomes dangerous to darkness when you refuse to surrender spiritually. This is where transformation begins, not when fear disappears completely, but when you choose to stand despite fear, when you choose prayer despite exhaustion, when you choose faith despite confusion, when you choose discipline despite resistance. That decision changes everything spiritually, because darkness loses power when agreement with fear is broken. And some of you have unknowingly agreed with hopelessness for too long, speaking defeat constantly, expecting disaster constantly, preparing for failure constantly. But your words matter spiritually, your agreement matters spiritually. And the enemy loves when people prophesy destruction over themselves daily. You must stop partnering with negativity, stop feeding fear, stop magnifying darkness constantly. Yes, warfare is real, but God's authority is greater. Protection is real. Deliverance is real. Breakthrough is real. Freedom is real. And many people remain trapped because they focus more on the power of darkness than the power of God. That imbalance creates fear. But spiritual authority destroys fear. This is why spiritually, strong people confront darkness boldly, not arrogantly, boldly. Because confidence rooted in God changes spiritual atmospheres. You stop panicking at every attack. You stop surrendering emotionally. You stop living intimidated. And suddenly peace begins returning. Clarity begins returning. Strength begins returning. Because spiritually awakened people stop cooperating with oppression. Listen carefully. Not every hardship is witchcraft. Not every battle is spiritual attack, but repeated, destructive patterns combined with spiritual heaviness, confusion, fear, oppression, and resistance should never be ignored carelessly. Discernment matters, wisdom matters, prayer matters, and awareness matters, because what you fail to recognize can continue operating unchecked, but what gets exposed can finally be confronted. And many of you watching right now are no longer spiritually asleep. You are recognizing the patterns. You are understanding the warfare. And most importantly, you are beginning to realize that darkness only seemed powerful while it remained hidden. The fear ends today. The confusion ends today. Every hidden attack working against your peace, your mind, your purpose, and your future is being exposed by the light of truth. You are not powerless. You are not abandoned. And you are not destined to live under spiritual oppression another day of your life. Stand up spiritually. Pray boldly. Discern sharply. And never bow your mind to fear again. Because darkness trembles the moment you finally awaken.